For most of her career, Nicole Kidman has been known for her impeccable composure, an actress whose presence seemed carved from light, discipline, and control. But when she stepped onto the set of that quiet evening interview, something unusual happened long before the cameras even started recording. She looked lighter. Not younger, not softer, just lighter, as if she had spent the entire day making peace with something she had carried for years. The crew noticed it first. She greeted everyone warmly, with an ease rarely seen during press tours. She wasn't rushing, wasn't rehearsing answers in her head. She simply existed, calm and steady, as if she knew that this night would mark a shift in her life. And it would. Because what Nicole was about to say, what she had never said publicly before, was the kind of truth that strips glamour from even the brightest Hollywood star. The interviewer began with familiar questions about her latest film, her daughters, her career longevity. Nicole answered politely, thoughtfully. But then, somewhere between a question about aging and a comment about legacy, she paused. Not a dramatic pause, just a quiet moment where she folded her hands and exhaled, as if finally surrendering to something inside her. "I want to talk about something I've never spoken about," she said, her voice low and steady. The interviewer blinked, surprised. "Of course, anything you'd like." Nicole nodded. "It's about Keith. And about us. And about something I realized only recently." She looked down for a moment, gathering courage. When she lifted her eyes, they held none of the polished distance she usually presented during interviews. "I spent years in a marriage that I didn't fully allow myself to feel." The words settled heavily in the room. Nicole Kidman, award-winning actress, global icon, symbol of strength, was admitting she had lived inside her own life with the lights dimmed. "It wasn't Keith," she continued. "It was me. I didn't know how to let love all the way in. I thought I did. I acted like I did. But I didn't." She paused again, her fingers lightly touching the arm of her chair. "I grew up learning how to survive, not how to receive. There's a difference." Her honesty startled even herself. "And when Keith came into my life, he loved me in a way I didn't recognize. A way that felt safe. A way that terrified me because I didn't feel worthy of it." She looked directly at the interviewer. "You know, people assume that fear in a marriage comes from the possibility of losing someone. But my fear came from being fully seen." She leaned back slightly, her voice softening. "Keith saw parts of me I didn't want to know existed. And he didn't turn away. Ever. Not once." For a moment, she didn't speak. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was full, warm, like a held breath. Then she told the interviewer about a night she had never shared before. Not with the press, not with colleagues, not with anyone outside her closest circle. It was early in their relationship. She had been filming a demanding project, one of those emotionally draining roles that blurred into her personal life. Nicole returned home late, drained in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion and everything to do with fear. Fear of failing. Fear of breaking something good. Fear of needing someone too much. "I came home and dropped my keys on the floor," she said. "I remember hearing the sound and thinking, I can't do this. I can't be the person he believes I am." Keith found her in the hallway, sitting on the floor with her head in her hands. He didn't touch her at first. He simply sat down beside her and waited for her to breathe. "Are you hurting?" he asked softly. And Nicole, who had survived fame, heartbreak, reinvention, motherhood, Nicole, who had endured the world's scrutiny, said nothing. Because she didn't know the answer. "I thought he would walk away," she said. I thought anyone would. But instead, he wrapped his arms around me and said, "You don't have to be strong right now." Her voice trembled, barely, but enough. No one had ever said that to me. That night stayed with her for years, tucked away in the quiet corners of her memory. But even then, I didn't open the door fully. I let him see a part of me, but not the whole. I was afraid that if I let him all the way in, he'd find something unlovable. She took a deep breath. And that fear followed me. For years. The interviewer leaned forward gently. "But something changed?" Nicole nodded. "Yes. Something changed. And it happened when I turned 58. She smiled wistfully, almost in disbelief. You spend your whole life thinking emotional breakthroughs happen when you're young. That love is something you figure out in your 20s or 30s. But sometimes you don't understand your own heart until much later." She paused, letting the truth settle. And it took me 58 years to realize that Keith had been loving me fully while I loved him halfway. Her voice softened into something fragile and brave. And I didn't want to live like that anymore. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She simply looked relieved, as if finally speaking this truth freed something inside her. Outside the studio windows, the city lights flickered like quiet witnesses to her confession. This was only the beginning of what she was ready to reveal. Nicole leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms loosely, not in defense, but in a quiet, thoughtful way, as if she were finally letting the weight of her own words settle on her shoulders. There was no turning back now. The studio felt smaller, warmer, almost like a private room in which two people exchanged truths that had been waiting for years. When I turned 58, as she continued, as something inside me shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't triggered by an event. It was more like waking up one morning and realizing I had been living in a house with locked rooms. The interviewer listened intently. And for the first time, Nicole added, I felt brave enough to open them. She explained how aging, something Hollywood teaches women to fear, brought her a sense of liberation she never expected. Instead of shrinking, she expanded. Instead of feeling irrelevant, she felt more herself than she ever had. For years, I performed confidence. I performed vulnerability too, ironically, because that's what my roles demanded. But authenticity? True emotional nakedness? She shook her head. That's something I never allowed myself in my private life. That was when she confessed the truth she once hid even from herself. I loved Keith deeply, but safely. I kept a part of me untouched, hidden, controlled. I didn't do it consciously. It was survival. It was habit. She paused. It was fear. A faint smile tugged at her lips, one filled with regret but also acceptance. I married a man who loved with his whole being. And I gave him love wrapped in caution. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, an almost shy gesture. But Keith, he never made me feel wrong for it. He never pushed. He never demanded the version of me I didn't know how to be. Nicole then leaned forward slightly, elbows resting delicately on her knees. There was a period, more than a few months, honestly, when he felt me drifting. I didn't realize I was pulling away. But he did. She described how she became quieter, more inward, more distant. She blamed it on exhaustion from acting, from traveling, from juggling motherhood and career. But beneath all that was something more difficult to admit. I was afraid of happiness. Afraid it could vanish. Afraid I'd ruin it. So I kept myself half available emotionally. Keith noticed, of course. He always did. One evening, during dinner, he set down his fork and looked at her with a softness that made her heart ache. "You're not here," he whispered. And I couldn't deny it, and Nicole told the interviewer. I tried to say I was tired, overwhelmed, distracted. But he saw through all of it. The memory still lingered in her eyes. That night, I cried in the bathroom, as she said softly. Not because of anything he said, but because I finally realized how much of myself I had withheld. She admitted she had spent years mastering the art of carrying pain without letting it spill. But suppression, no matter how elegant, always has consequences. What she revealed next was something she had never shared publicly, and it surprised even her to speak it out loud. I used to stand in front of the mirror and practice being okay. Practice smiling. Practice being the woman I thought Keith deserved. She lowered her gaze. But none of that mattered to him. All he ever wanted was the version of me that wasn't performing. She paused, took a breath, and continued. There was a night I haven't talked about in almost 20 years. The room seemed to shrink as her voice softened. It was after a premiere. I had spent the entire evening smiling, posing, giving interviews. People praised me. They loved the dress. They loved the speech. But inside, I felt empty. When they returned home, she went silent. Keith followed her into the living room, took one look at her, and understood something was wrong. Without a word, he sat beside her on the couch. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't tell me to talk. He just took my hand and held it. Nicole swallowed. And I wanted to collapse into him. I wanted to tell him everything I feared. But I froze. I couldn't speak. I wasn't ready. So she did what she always did. She retreated. I told him I needed some time alone, as she said. And Keith nodded. He let me go. But he stayed in the house, awake, waiting, just in case I needed him. It was a small memory, but one she had never forgotten. That was the night I realized his love wasn't conditional. It wasn't fragile. It wasn't based on what I gave him. It simply was. Nicole glanced toward the floor, her voice quieting. And still, I didn't let myself receive it fully. The interviewer gently asked, "Do you think Keith knew?" Nicole nodded slowly. Yes. He knew. He didn't say it, but he knew. And he waited. He waited for the day I would finally step toward him instead of away. She looked up again, her expression calm and luminous. And that day didn't come until 58. It took me 58 years to learn how to love someone without fear. The interviewer asked almost in a whisper, "What changed?" Nicole smiled with deep sincerity. I looked at him one morning, making coffee, hair a mess, wearing a shirt he's had for years, and I realized that this man had been loving me, truly loving me, while I'd been rationing my heart. She leaned back again. And I didn't want to ration anymore. Nicole took another breath, the kind that seems to pull memories to the surface. Her eyes softened as she continued, and the room around her felt unusually quiet, as if even the lights were listening. What happened next, as she said gently, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a grand turning point. It was something small. Something so ordinary it almost felt insignificant. But sometimes the smallest moments crack open the biggest truths. She then described a morning, simple, unassuming. She woke early, long before the sun reached the windows. Keith was still asleep beside her, one hand resting across the blanket, chest rising and falling in the slow rhythm of deep, peaceful rest. "I watched him breathe," she said. "I don't know why. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe it was the way the light fell on him. Or maybe I finally slowed down enough to see him without the noise of my own thoughts." She admitted she had spent years moving fast, emotionally, professionally, mentally. Speed had been her shield. Stillness had always felt dangerous. Stillness made room for feelings she didn't know how to handle. But that morning, as she continued, "If for the first time in my life, stillness didn't scare me. It felt safe." She brushed her thumb along the hem of her sleeve, remembering. I reached out and touched his hand. Just lightly. Something I'd done 1,000 times before. But this time, something inside me opened. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't an epiphany. It wasn't a revelation. It was recognition. I suddenly realized that I'd been holding my love for him like a fragile thing I was afraid to break. And it hit me, I was the only one who thought it was fragile. He never did. The interviewer's brows rose subtly. "And what did you do?" I whispered his name, as she said, a soft smile forming. "I don't even think I meant to. It just slipped out." Keith stirred, eyes still half closed. He reached for her instinctively, pulling her closer without waking fully. And I felt his arm around me, as she continued, and I couldn't believe how long I'd been depriving myself of that feeling. Of that presence. Of that simple, quiet belonging. For a moment, she looked like she might say more, but she stopped, not because she was hesitant, but because she wanted to choose her words deliberately. "I realized something else that morning," and Nicole said. "Something painful. Something beautiful." She lifted her gaze. "Love doesn't disappear when you turn away from it. It waits." She paused. And Keith had been waiting for me to return to myself. The interviewer leaned forward, clearly moved. "Did you tell him?" Nicole laughed softly, more out of tenderness than amusement. "Not immediately. I didn't want to ruin the moment by turning it into a confession or a dramatic speech. Instead, I got out of bed, made coffee, and just existed with him in silence when he woke up. And it felt like the first real morning of our marriage." As she spoke, her voice carried both warmth and something like awe, like she was still surprised by the quietness of that shift. And over the next few weeks, as she continued, I found myself reaching for him more. Not out of habit or comfort, but out of desire. Genuine desire to connect. To be close. To be present. She paused, then added. "One evening, I came home after a long day on set. Normally, I would retreat into myself, decompress alone, shut out the world. But that night, I went straight to him." She smiled softly. I wrapped my arms around him without saying a word. And Keith, he held me like he knew exactly what was happening. Like he'd been waiting for that moment for years. The interviewer's voice was almost a whisper. "What did he say?" Nicole exhaled. "He said, 'You're here.' Just that. Just 2 words. But I knew what he meant." She explained that "you're here" it didn't refer to physical presence. It meant emotional presence. Heart presence. That night, she said, I realized that the version of me he had been loving all these years wasn't the version of me I thought I was. He wasn't in love with the awards, or the poise, or the image. He loved the parts of me I didn't even appreciate. She paused. And I finally wanted to meet him at that depth. Something softened in her posture, kind of relief spread across her face, like someone stepping into the sunlight after living too long in shadows. But it didn't stop there, and Nicole continued. There was something else. Something Keith had been carrying quietly. The interviewer tilted his head. What do you mean? Nicole folded her hands together. He had his own fears, as she said quietly. Fears he tried to protect me from. Fears he thought would burden me. And when I finally opened my heart, he let his guard down too. She hesitated, searching for the right way to express something delicate. Keith told me there were moments, years ago, when he thought I might leave. The interviewer froze. Nicole nodded. He said he felt it in the pauses. In the distance. In the silence. He said he sometimes wondered if he was enough for me. Her eyes darkened with emotion. And hearing that broke me. Because I never wanted him to feel that way. She looked down, her voice warm and steady. That's when I realized love is not just about what you feel. It's about what you show. For the first time in the entire interview, Nicole's eyes glistened, not with tears of pain, but with gratitude. And I promised myself that at 58, I would not live the rest of my life holding anything back. She took one final breath before the story moved into its next chapter. And that decision, as she said, it changed everything that came after. Nicole rested her palms lightly on her knees, grounding herself before continuing, as though what came next required both courage and precision. After that shift inside me, as she began, I started seeing everything differently. Not just Keith. Not just our marriage. But myself. She explained how subtle the transformation was, how it didn't announce itself with fireworks or revelations, but with quiet moments that stitched themselves into her life like new threads. She noticed the way Keith's face softened whenever she walked into a room. The way he instinctively reached for her hand in crowded spaces. The way he leaned in when she spoke, even if she was saying nothing important. And for the first time, Nicole said, I allowed myself to believe that I was someone worth loving like that. It was a simple sentence, but the weight of it hung in the air like something sacred. Then she described a particular evening, one that marked the beginning of her emotional rebirth. It was late autumn. The air had turned cool, the kind of crispness that made the world feel both fragile and alive at once. Their home was quiet, dimly lit by soft lamps. Keith was in the living room, tuning a guitar he hadn't played in months, one he kept not for performance, but for comfort. Nicole entered the room, hesitating for a moment. Old patterns whispered to her, give him space, don't interrupt, don't risk emotional exposure. But this time, she ignored them. She sat on the rug beside him, close enough for her knee to touch his leg. Keith didn't stop playing. He didn't ask why she was there. He simply looked at her with warm, attentive eyes. And that was the moment, Nicole said softly, when I chose to stay. Not just physically, but emotionally. I didn't want to be a visitor in my own marriage anymore. She leaned her head on his shoulder, something she had done rarely in the past. Keith continued playing, soft chords, unpolished but sincere. Music that didn't need to be perfect to mean something. I told him I loved him, as she continued. Not the way you say it out of habit. Not in parsing. I said it like a truth I had finally allowed myself to feel. She paused, the memory drifting over her like warm light. And Keith stopped playing. Completely. He just let the guitar rest in his lap and pulled me closer. Her voice trembled faintly. He whispered, I know. I've always known. The interviewer asked gently, did that hurt to hear? Nicole nodded, smiling through a small ache. In a way, yes. Because it made me realize how long he'd been waiting. And how patient he had been. But it also healed me. Because he wasn't angry. He wasn't resentful. He was grateful. She lifted her gaze, eyes glowing with quiet emotion. That night, he told me something he had never said before. What followed was a truth that changed the way Nicole understood her husband and herself. He said, "Loving you has never been hard. Watching you hold yourself back, that was the painful part." Nicole inhaled sharply, even in the retelling. And that was when I knew, as she continued, that love isn't about how intensely you feel. It's about how much of yourself you allow the other person to see. She leaned back, crossing her arms loosely, not defensively, but thoughtfully. For years, I was afraid of disappointing him. Of not being enough. Or being too much. But Keith never needed perfection. He needed honesty. She smiled softly. And for the first time in my life, I was willing to give him that. Then she revealed something even more personal. Opening up to him didn't just change my marriage. It changed my family. She explained how her daughters noticed her laughing more, real laughter that started in the chest, not the throat. She listened more attentively, let herself relax into conversations, allowed joy to find her without suspicion. I became lighter, as she said. Not because life got easier, but because I stopped gripping it so tightly. Keith noticed too. Even in the smallest ways. There was one afternoon, and Nicole recalled, it when he walked into the kitchen and saw me dancing alone to some silly song on the radio. And he just stood there, watching, smiling like he was seeing me for the first time. She paused, her voice warm and full of wonder. In a way, I think he was. The transformation wasn't sudden, nor was it perfect. She had moments of doubt. Times when old fears resurfaced. But each time she felt herself retreating, she reached for him instead of away. And Keith, reliably, steadily, met her halfway. What she said next carried a gravity that pulled the room into stillness. There was something else he told me, as she said softly. Something he kept inside for years because he didn't want to burden me. The interviewer tensed slightly. What was it? Nicole folded her hands, her expression tender and solemn. He admitted that during a very difficult period, years before, I made him feel invisible. The words landed heavily. Nicole swallowed. It wasn't something I did intentionally. It wasn't cruelty. It was emotional absence. I shut down. I went silent. And silence can hurt more than any words. She looked down. When he told me that, I broke. Because I never wanted to be someone who made him feel unseen. The interviewer asked carefully, How did you respond? Nicole lifted her eyes again, steadier now. I told him I see him. I told him I'm here. And I told him I'm not leaving emotionally ever again. She smiled, calm, radiant, certain. And he believed me. The room around her felt illuminated by the quiet truth she carried. And that, Nicole said, it was the beginning of the rest of our marriage. Nicole grew quieter as she approached the next part of her story. Not hesitant, just thoughtful, as if she were touching something delicate inside her memory. What I didn't realize, as she began, it was that my opening up to him gave him permission to open up to me in return. And what he revealed changed everything I thought I understood about our marriage. She paused, her fingers gently tracing the edge of the armrest. For years, I thought Keith was the steady one. The solid one. the emotionally grounded one. But the truth was, he had been carrying things alone too. The interviewer leaned forward slightly, sensing a shift in the tone. Nicole continued. One night, after we had a long, honest conversation, he told me something he had never said out loud. Something I would never have imagined. She took a slow breath. He said, "There were nights I stayed awake because I was afraid you'd realize you didn't need me." The silence that followed was thick and unmoving. Even the interviewer seemed caught off guard. Nicole's eyes softened with a mixture of sadness and tenderness. "I had no idea he felt that way," she said. "Not for a second. I always thought he walked through love like it was home. He always seemed so certain. So sure." But Keith wasn't sure. He wasn't invincible. He wasn't untouched by doubt. He told me he worried I'd outgrow him emotionally. That I'd find clarity or strength or independence, and he'd be left behind. She exhaled slowly, absorbing the memory. I asked him, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" And he said, "Because you already carried enough. I didn't want to add my weight on top of yours." Nicole closed her eyes for a brief moment, overwhelmed by how deeply she had misread him for years. "That was when it hit me," she said, "that marriage isn't only about what you share. It's also about what you hide. And sometimes, what we hide is what hurts us most." For so long, Nicole had believed she was the only fragile one. But fragility wasn't one-sided. It never is. And that night, Nicole said, for the first time, Keith let me hold his fears. He let me hold him. Not metaphorically. Literally. She described how he sat beside her on the couch, shoulders slumped, eyes tired in a way she hadn't seen before. He leaned against her, not as a husband leaning on a wife, but as a man leaning on the one person he trusted most. I wrapped my arms around him, as she said softly. He buried his face in my shoulder. And I realized, after nearly 2 decades, that I had never held him like that before. It wasn't the intimacy of lovers. It wasn't romantic passion. It was something deeper. It was the intimacy of safety, she said. Of being known. Of being allowed to fall apart. The interviewer asked in a low voice, "What did you feel in that moment?" Nicole smiled, a slow, profound, vulnerable smile. "I felt like our marriage finally became equal. Not because we loved each other the same way, but because we were finally brave enough to show each other the ugliest parts. The scared parts. The human parts." She tucked her hair gently behind her ear. "That was the night we stopped performing for each other." Nicole admitted she realized how easy it is to fall into roles, even inside a relationship. "I used to think my job was to be strong," she said. "To be graceful. To be composed. But Keith didn't need any of that. He needed me. The real me." She looked up, steady but emotional. "And I needed the real him, too." Then she described a moment that changed everything for her, a moment Keith didn't even realize was significant. It was morning, and Nicole said softly. He was sitting at the kitchen island, drinking coffee, looking out the window. Nothing unusual. But the way he held his mug, something about it felt so vulnerable. The interviewer didn't interrupt. I walked over to him, as she continued. And without thinking, I put my hand on his back. Usually I'd do it lightly, politely. But this time, I let my hand rest there. Fully. Like I was anchoring him. Keith reached up and covered her hand with his own. And he whispered, "Thank you." She swallowed. I didn't understand what he meant at first. But then I realized he was thanking me for staying. For being present. For choosing him, not out of habit or duty, but out of love. Nicole then shared something that brought a soft ache to her words. For so many years, I worried he'd get tired of waiting for me to open up. But the truth was, he was scared of losing me too. She paused. We were afraid of the same thing. We just never said it. That, she said, was the foundation of their marriage's rebirth. Two people finally speaking the fears they spent years trying to protect each other from. Nicole's voice warmed. And once we put down the walls, the love between us didn't just return. It grew. It deepened. It became something I had never experienced before, something I never thought someone like me could feel. The interviewer asked, barely audible, "What changed inside you?" Nicole answered without hesitation. "I stopped trying to be a woman worth loving. And I became a woman who allows herself to be loved." She let that truth settle. And that, and Nicole said, is when I finally, fully chose him. Nicole's tone shifted again, softer, steadier, almost reverent, as though the memories she was approaching required a gentler touch. "I think," as she began slowly, "that people assume love deepens through grand milestones, weddings, anniversaries, shared triumphs. But the truth is, our love deepened in the quietest spaces." She clasped her hands together lightly. "It grew in the mornings when he brought me tea without asking. In the evenings when he'd sit beside me while I read, not needing conversation. In the way he always noticed when my breathing changed, every sigh, every pause, every unspoken feeling." Nicole smiled faintly. "That's what I began to see when I opened my heart. Not romance. Not fantasy. Or a life. A real life with a real man who loved me long before I knew how to love him back." The interviewer watched her carefully, sensing she was building towards something. Nicole looked down for a moment, gathering the threads of the story. "After I turned 58, as she said, I started reading through old journals. Not intentionally, just cleaning, sorting. But one entry from years ago stopped me in my tracks." She paused, eyes softening. "It was from a night I barely remembered. A night when I felt overwhelmed and disconnected. I had written, 'I think Keith deserves someone better. Someone simpler. Someone who doesn't vanish inside her own mind.'" Her throat tightened slightly. "I didn't show him that journal. But that sentence, it haunted me. Because for so long, I believed it." The interviewer asked gently, "Ian now?" Nicole lifted her head with a kind of clarity that didn't need dramatics. "And now I know it was never about deserving. It was about allowing." She exhaled slowly, as though shedding the weight of decades. "Once I understood that, everything changed." She shifted in her seat, leaning forward slightly. "There was a night, just a few months after my birthday, when Keith and I sat together on our back porch. It was late. The sky was clear. And for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. Keith was drinking tea, tapping his fingers lightly against the mug, a habit he had when he was thinking deeply. Nicole watched him for a long moment before speaking. I told him, 'I'm sorry for all the years I wasn't fully present.' Keith looked surprised, not hurt, not defensive, just surprised. And then he said something I will never forget." Nicole took a deep breath, as though aligning herself with the memory. He said, "You don't owe me an apology for growing." The interviewer blinked, visibly moved. Nicole continued, voice full of warmth. I asked him what he meant. And he said, "You didn't shut me out because you didn't love me. You shut me out because you didn't know how to love yourself. And that's not your fault." She placed a hand over her heart. That was the moment I realized he understood me better than I had ever understood myself. Her eyes brightened, not with tears, but with recognition. That night, I told him something I'd never told anyone. She paused. I told him I was afraid of being loved, not because of vulnerability, but because I was afraid of disappointing the person who loved me. The confession hung in the air like a delicate thread. "And Keith? Oh, Keith." She smiled with emotional disbelief. He took my hand and said, "You could never disappoint me. Even your silence taught me how deeply you feel things." The interviewer inhaled sharply, clearly struck by the intimacy of that line. Nicole's expression grew thoughtful. "And then," she said, "he confessed something in return." Keith admitted that during difficult years when Nicole was emotionally distant, he questioned himself constantly. Not her. Himself. He said, "I wondered whether I was giving you enough. Whether my love was loud enough for you to hear." Nicole shook her head softly, eyes shining with tenderness. And hearing him say that broke something inside me. Because Keith Urban, the man who loves like a sunrise, steady, warm, reliable, believed he wasn't enough for me. She straightened slightly, as if still protective of him even in recounting the story. I told him he had always been enough. More than enough. I told him his love was the only thing that never scared me. Her voice lowered to a gentle whisper. I only feared losing it. The interviewer sat silent for several seconds before finally speaking. "So what happened next?" he asked softly. Nicole smiled, full and honest. "We held each other. For a long time. No words. Just presence. I could feel his heart beating against mine. And for the first time in my life, I let myself believe that I belonged there." She folded her hands over her lap. "It was the night our marriage was born again." The interviewer nodded slowly, as though absorbing the meaning behind her words. Nicole continued. "The next morning, something happened that surprised both of us." She looked down, laughing quietly with a fondness that softened every feature of her face. "I woke up before him. And instead of going downstairs or checking my phone, I stayed. I stayed beside him. I watched him sleep. I memorized the lines on his face, the softness around his eyes, the way he mumbled quietly in his dreams." She paused. "And for the first time in 17 years, I felt joy. The real kind. Not excitement. Not adrenaline. Not gratitude. Joy." She inhaled deeply. "And that's when I knew I had finally, truly fallen in love with my husband." Nicole looked directly at the interviewer, her voice steady, full of certainty. "I loved him before. Of course I did. But I didn't let myself fall until 58. She smiled again, a quiet smile filled with completion. "And falling in love at that age?" She shook her head. "It feels like being rewritten from the inside." The studio remained silent, reverent, like a place witnessing something sacred. Nicole Kidman took one last breath before moving into the final chapters of her confession. Everything that came next changed us forever. Nicole drew in one more quiet breath, the kind that signals both closure and beginning. Her eyes softened, not with sorrow, but with that rare calm that arrives only after telling a truth you've carried alone for too long. "What came after," she said, It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a reinvention. It was simply life, but lived fully this time. She explained that the months following her emotional awakening felt like stepping into a familiar home with the lights finally turned on. Every room looked different. Every moment with Keith felt richer, steady, illuminated. We didn't start over, as she clarified. We continued, but with everything that had been missing finally present. They cooked dinner together more often. They took long walks in the evenings, sometimes holding hands, sometimes not needing to. They laughed at small things, inside jokes that suddenly felt newly meaningful. They argued less, not because conflict vanished, but because fear did. One morning, and Nicole continued, Keith told me, "You feel closer." And I realized he was right. I wasn't walking through life beside him anymore. I was walking with him. She paused, as if replaying the memory in her mind. I didn't become a different woman at 58. I became a more honest one. Keith, in return, allowed himself to soften too. He shared worries he had kept inside. He let himself lean on her in moments when he once pretended to be strong. We met each other again, and Nicole said, "Not as the people we tried to be, but as the people we truly were." The interviewer asked quietly, "Are you happier now than you've ever been?" Nicole didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said. "But not because life is easier. Because I'm finally present for it." She then shared one last moment, the one that, to her, symbolized all the growth, all the healing, all the love that had been patiently waiting. It was late evening. Keith was on the porch, strumming absent-mindedly on a guitar he never intended to perform with. Nicole stepped outside carrying 2 cups of tea. She set one beside him and sat down, her shoulder brushing his. He stopped playing. She looked at him, and with no fear, no hesitation, and no walls, she said, "I thank you for loving me before I knew how to love you." Keith smiled, quiet, gentle, full of years and softness. "I never wanted anything else," he replied. They stayed there until the sky darkened, not speaking, not needing to. Just breathing together in a kind of silence that belongs only to people who have truly, finally found each other. Nicole turned back to the interviewer, her voice steady. "The world sees glamour. Movies. Dresses. Awards. But my greatest success is that I learned how to love my husband fully before my time ran out." She offered a small, luminous smile, the smile of a woman no longer performing for the world, just existing in it truthfully. "And Keith?" the interviewer asked softly. Nicole's eyes glowed. "He tells me I came home. And he's right." The cameras cut. The studio dimmed. But the world carried her words long after. Because the confession wasn't really about heartbreak or struggle. It wasn't even about marriage. It was about finally choosing love, real, unfiltered, imperfect love, after a lifetime of fear. And at 58, Nicole Kidman proved something simple, universal, and profoundly human. It's never too late to open your heart.